All right, looks like Facebook is up and running. Welcome, guys. So tonight's topic is going to be fun, and tonight it's kind of actually very early morning, so 1:24 a.m. Uh, guess I opted for the early morning. So tonight's topic is we're going to talk about creating happiness through conflict resolution. And this one's going to be a fun one. I'm going to roast myself a little bit, so that should be interesting. So, for those of you that are first joining me, this is your first time, my name is Tina. I am a happiness coach, and I help people deal with feelings of depression, anxiety, frustrations, anger, sadness, any of those challenging emotions, and I help you shift to a happier place. I do this by sharing my own personal experience, strength, and hope, and I talk about how we move those emotions. And I share based on my own personal experiences, and I also share change management techniques that I used when I was in corporate. So, tonight we're going to be going through the what and how to communicate, how emotions affect communication, and strategies to help diffuse situations. And we're going to break that down into five components. Okay, so uh, so the situation. Here's the situation. So I am currently divorced and I am living with my ex, and we had a little bit of a conflict. And if you think it's challenging to get your wife to admit that she's wrong, guys, try getting your ex-wife to admit that she's wrong. So this is the situation. I put something on the grocery list that we had needed. He was coming home from work, a little bit behind. Some frustrations happened at work, and also some challenges of timing with some money that are a bunch of different issues kind of came up. So that had him frustrated and irritated. And frustration is that first um, fight or flight mode, right? It's that fear mode. And so he calls me to say, "Hey, how are we going through this much Kleenex?" And I'm like, "What?" So now, so this brings us to the first piece. Emotions and tonality will affect how we respond. Let me just see if I can turn this a little bit. There we go. So we can see it on TikTok and on Facebook. So emotions and tonality, and emotions will affect your accuracy of the question. So technically, from his perspective, he was correct in wondering why we were going through Kleenex so fast when he had just bought 6 boxes. And so the thing is I thought I was correct because I had just finished it and I didn't realize there was another box in the spare room, like the package. So, from my perspective, when it came across like that, that immediately the way the question was asked and the tonality caused me to go into a defensive mode that I had to justify why I'm putting something on the list that we technically didn't need. So um, that could have escalated quickly, and we kind of went back and forth, different questions. So, what I want you to understand from this particular point is that when we get in a state of fear, that is more likely to react. And what we have to remember is whoever we're addressing in the communication, they are not aware of your emotions. So now they're going to pick it up in your tonality, but they may not fully understand why it's being addressed in that particular manner. And based on their previous experiences and previous experiences with you, they may be filtering your request, your question, even if you're 100% right, you can be right or you can be happy, um, through how they've experienced you before, and they may react negatively. So, other party is not up to speed on what's going on with you emotionally, why you're feeling it. So what often ends up happening is either one of two things. Either somebody comes back and they address it logically and they counteract. It's like, well, why are you asking that kind of question? Of course, if I put it on the list, I think we need it. So why is this now a personal attack, right? And so that's kind of how I responded. And then there was a bit of banter back and forth. And then lo and behold, I go in the room and there's the Kleenex. So we didn't actually need it. And I start laughing because I'm like, I realized I'm basically gaslighting him, not intentionally. But sometimes we get really reactive and we think that, well, this is about a different situation. So we end up arguing about things that aren't actually relevant. And this all stems from not being able to recognize the emotion. So, how this situation could have been mitigated and avoided was saying, hey, I see this is on the list. I thought I just bought some. Can you go check the other room? Rather than making it an attack of I'm putting unnecessary things on the list, because that's how it came across based on the tonality. And so therefore it came across that I'm being stupid, where it's like, no, I put it on the list because I thought we needed it, right? So it comes across different. So we have to understand how emotions affect communication on both ends. So because of my previous experiences, I reacted, he reacted, and that fear kicked in, right? So mine came out in fight, and I started arguing back rather than understanding where he was coming from because of the previous conversations that we had had before this situation as well. So a lot of factors go in. We need to understand the context of what is going on, um, what the previous experiences are, and what both parties' fear factor levels are at. Because if we are in a state of fear, we're not going to react in our best self. We're also not going to perceive the situation as clearly as we normally would if we are in a state of calm, right? So if he wasn't concerned about the timing of finances and stuff like that, he would have just picked up the Kleenex. If we had extra, it's not like it would have spoiled, right? So it was more because of that fear rather than the fact that it was on the list. The problem wasn't because it was on the list, it was because of the concerns. And so trying to address those emotions and take responsibility for those is the better way of being able to address those things. So number three is being able to manage the reactivity back and forth between both parties. And any party can do this, and this is why it's important for us to do that emotional work, because that makes us much more aware of what's going on with us, and we can be more cognizant of understanding how to phrase a question so that we are not being overly reactive. We're taking much more ownership for our emotions, saying, you know what, I'm really stressed right now. Can you just please go double check the back room? Because I could have swore I just bought some. And I would have said, okay, sure, I'll go check, right? And that would have been a much better question rather than why is this on the list and how are we going through so much, right? So it's a slight nuance, but it's an important difference, right? And this is how you can end up inadvertently causing conflict because of your reactions and the the way that you're communicating and how you're communicating. Is it coming across as an attack, and maybe you're not even intending it, but you're in that fear aggression mode kind of thing, right? So I know I get that way too. When I get fearful, I get aggressive. And the way I will ask a question is not as soft as it normally would be, and it has a more accusatory tone. So being aware of this being aware of my current emotional state, how I am phrasing a question matters, because I used to do this a lot, especially when I was doing emails at work, because when I got fearful or I was like under tight timelines, I got very direct to the point, and I wouldn't um, consider how that message was going to be received. So when I got better at being aware of how messages are being conveyed based on my own personal emotions, that helped mitigate some of the challenges of communication that ended up coming up. So, managing my own reactivity. So, I also stayed calm and I didn't blow up when he asked those questions. I came back with logic rather than with, you never believe me. You always think that I put unnecessary, like I could have went off on this completely overreactive emotional tangent. I didn't, because I've done some of this work and I understand it's like staying calm. And I called out his emotions and saying, hey, I understand you're feeling fearful, that you're frustrated. This wouldn't really be an issue. And so, is it really that you want to know how much Kleenex I'm using? Is that really the question? Or do you want me to go check? And he's like, just go check. So I went and checked, and I started laughing because I realized that I was completely wrong, which leads me to the next piece. Admit you're wrong. Admit you are wrong when you realize it. So many people have a really hard time with this, and especially in business. I have seen this so many times, and it just causes so much conflict. What they'll do is they'll continue to blame the other person. And it's like, well, if you hadn't have done this, then I wouldn't have done that, right? And it's like, nope. I just flat out, I started laughing because I realized I was being the asshole in the situation. I started laughing and realized, you know what? I'm wrong. There you go. You have it on record. Never has that ever been said. No, that's not the case. I do admit that I'm wrong. But I know it's the going joke to get a wife to admit that she's wrong, right? Let alone a wife, an ex-wife, right? So admitting you're wrong will go a long way with being able to diffuse the situation. It shows that you're taking ownership, that you are taking accountability of your part in the communication breakdown, and that goes to helping to repair that communication breakdown. And then the last one is laugh at your mistakes. And I'm like, I could I could appreciate how frustrating that would have been had the roles been reversed. So putting yourself in the other person's shoes allows you to understand what's going on, and then there's no blame, and then he's laughing because he's like, I knew I wasn't wrong. And then there were jokes about gaslighting, and it wasn't a deliberate thing, but it could feel that way. And if people don't take ownership of their part of it, then that's what it ends up feeling like on that side. If I hadn't admitted that I was wrong, if I had just continued and maybe jump to something else, because I know sometimes that happens in conversation, and it's like, instead of admitting that you're wrong about something, oftentimes people will, well, you did this, and it's something completely irrelevant to the current conversation. So being able to stay on track with the current conversation is important. And if it does get off track and somebody brings up a completely different subject and you start fighting about that kind of thing, that's where you need to stop that conversation, bring it back to the original conversation, focus on that, and not get derailed with different issues that are coming up. So these are ways that you can help manage and mitigate the conflicts that come up, allow you to be happier with it, and also um, have fun. We all make mistakes, and looking at the situation and going, how could I have handled that better? And I looked at my part too. Instead of going into logic mode, I could have said, you know what? Let me just double check. I'm pretty sure I put that on the list correctly. But it's context, right? So it was fear because I knew of his fear of the timing of the finances, and I knew we had to be careful. And so also looking at, um, so that got me defensive rather than, instead of looking at myself and going, why am I getting defensive about this? Let's just go, because if I was okay and I was in a space of love and not fear, which is fear is false evidence appearing real, I would have not taken it so personally. I'd be like, I'm pretty sure we still need it, but let me just double check, right? So anytime both parties can decide to stop it from escalating. You can stop it from escalating by taking that step back, not taking things personally, being aware of how your emotions are, and choosing to change the narrative so that it is more collaborative instead of combative, right? So when we get in that state of fear, it tends to end up going along the lines of us against them kind of thing, or you go into this battle mode rather than collaborative mode. And you always want to be able to make sure that you are on the same team, that it's not, uh, you know, it's not every man for himself or every woman for herself, right? And if we focus on being in that loving state, then we are able to communicate in a way that is constructive, that is helpful, and allows for both parties to win. So, that is kind of how I wanted to bring today's training of how you can create happiness through conflict by understanding your emotions, knowing how it impacts your tonality, and how you end up accurately phrasing the questions, or more in this case, if you're in that state of fear, you're more likely to inaccurately pose a question in a way that creates conflict rather than solving problems, right? Um, you also have to remember that the other party may not be aware of your emotions or where this is coming from, so that leaves them to filter it through their previous experiences that can cause them to get defensive or reactive in some sort of negative way. And number three is managing our reactivity so that on both sides, if both people are working towards staying calm and not reactive, is aware of their own emotions and is responsible for how they express those emotions, both parties can stay calm. Both parties are now not going to end up doing the blame game and shaming each other. It's more of, let's deal with the facts, focus on the situation and the subject at hand, not drag in a bunch of other different things, because that's usually a deflection mechanism when you cannot admit that you are wrong. And it's kind of like, so if you can't admit that you're wrong in this situation, you might bring up another situation where you know that you were right, and now that's in some way justifies you being wrong in this situation. So, or at least deflects the attention from that. So be aware if that is something that you have a tendency to do, so that you can stop yourself from dragging in other subjects or other arguments, so that you can focus at the issue that you are currently dealing with. And then lastly, when you recognize you're wrong and you admit that you're wrong, laugh at your mistakes. Laugh at, if the shoe was on the other foot, how frustrating that would be. And you realize that even you can be a pain in the ass sometimes, and not to be that way. And so, guys, I hope this was helpful. I will be posting the replay up on my YouTube channel, which, if you are just jumping in now, you want to catch that on my YouTube channel, which is Coach Tina B 125. Go there, make sure you click on the subscribe button so that you're notified when I upload the new videos. Okay, so guys, hope that was helpful. We'll see you again tomorrow. Have a great night. Bye.